back to Dragon Dreams. So, my name's Ivan, and today I'm going to talk about how to make a religion for a fantasy setting. So, look, here's the thing. In a lot of the fantasy settings for games, the religions are kind of impoverished, in my not so humble opinion. Like, they have a list of gods, but that's kind of it. It's like there's the gods and like their holy symbols or something, and their alignments or whatever. And there's a lot more to religion. Like, religion is such a rich topic that I think you could really make your fantasy setting pop if you do the right things. All right, so let me explain. Broken the subjects down into 5 main categories of world building for religion. One is theology. The second is values. The third is the style of worship. Then holidays. And then I have a miscellaneous category, which is like raiment, customs, things like that. So let's get to it. So theology is basically, for our purposes, just what people believe about divinity or spirits or whatever. So you have several options. You've got ancestor worship, first of all, which is basically, as the name implies, you worship your clan's or tribe's ancestors. It might also be heroes of your culture, or ancient queens and kings and whatnots, ancient sages and so forth who lived a long time ago. That might be part of it as well. But the point is that you're worshiping people who once lived. All right. Number 2, you have animism. And animism is the concept that there's a spirit in everything. There's a spirit of every rock, of every tree, each mountain, each spring, all have spirits. You might even have like a spirit of your house and a spirit of a board in your house and a spirit of a knot on that board. And if you think this is starting to sound like Shinto, from your favorite anime, if that's your main understanding of Shinto, or if you know a lot about Shinto because you're, Japanese or, fluent in that culture, that's a really prime example of animism that a lot of people know. Okay. And you can have big spirits and small spirits. You could have the spirit who's responsible for all lightning, for example, or you could have, as I said, the spirit of the tree outside. Next up, we have polytheism. And polytheism is, I think, the most familiar one in fantasy settings. It seems like almost the default. There's a bunch of gods. So the idea is there's just lots of deities, and there's a deity for all these different things. Now, I have a background in Greco-Roman classics, and one thing I can tell you right now is that in real polytheistic cultures, first of all, they're very practical. So if you do agriculture, you're going to have a deity of agriculture. If you do herding, you're going to have a deity of herding. You might have both. If you do both, you'll have both. You'll have deities of kingship or leadership or something along those lines. Deities of love and justice and war. Maybe not necessarily war itself, but it might be more like the king of the gods is the one you pray to because you think that he determines who wins in wars. Or you might have like an Athena-like goddess, like a goddess of justice and warfare, or a goddess like Ishtar from ancient Babylon, who's love and war. Point being that you're going to have all the practical things that a civilization need. Real polytheism is a lot different from sword and sorcery polytheism, which is, I think, where a lot of fantasy settings get their ideas. So you don't tend to have like the weird, like, lizard god cult or something that sacrifices virgins at the full moon because it's evil. Like, you can certainly have that in your campaign. I mean, that sounds cool, but, like, they didn't really have stuff like that in ancient times. They were much more practical than that. Okay, and another thing about polytheism is I personally have observed that at least ancient Greco-Roman polytheism, the polytheism I know about, is more like a Venn diagram than it is like distinct characters. Let me give you an example. So, Hecate, she was a goddess of doors, gates, and crossroads, and also a deity, originally maybe an Earth Mother deity of Anatolia that came into Greece. She was given portions of sky, earth, and sea. She's can sort of have to do something with the dead, because she's kind of stands at the crossroads maybe of the mortal world, the world of the gods, and the world of the dead. So she knows how to navigate that. So the crossroads can mean multiple things. Anyway, I'm probably getting a little too excited about Hecate, because I think she's a really interesting goddess. But point being, there is a concept that some of her worshippers had as celestial Hecate, since the moon was an important celestial body for her. They said that Artemis, if you're Greek, or Diana, if you're Roman, that's the terrestrial version. Okay, all right, and then going up to the celestial version, because she's a moon associated deity. You have Luna if you're Roman, or Selene if you're Greek. All right, who are the moon goddesses. And then if you're talking about the underworld aspect of Hecate, then that's Persephone, who's the wife of Hades. Now you might go, but these are different goddesses. These are separate deities. Yes, for the Hecate worshippers, not to everybody, but for the Hecate worshippers, they were kind of within this larger Venn diagram of Hecate, so that Hecate can have kind of circles inside of her. Okay, so that's how real polytheism actually works. Interestingly enough, they also did not have ethnic or cultural deities quite so much. It was actually a lot more like they thought there was one set of deities that everybody worshipped under different names using different mythology. For example, you look up at the sky, there's a sun. There's lots of different suns. There's only one sun. There's obviously only one sun god. There can't be more than one sun god. That wouldn't make any sense. So, if there's only one sun god, it must be that it's like we Greeks call that god Helios. The Romans call that god Sol. The Egyptians call that god Ra. So you can have gods inside of gods. You can also have gods that overlap with other gods. And this brings me to monism. So if you take that Venn diagram and you put like a big circle around it, and you say there's some deity who's all the deities, you go from polytheism to something called monism. Next up, you have henotheism. And henotheism is the idea that there are many gods, but there's only one worth worshiping. So you might be like, well, there's only one good God. And that's our God, of course, because you always think that, your God is good. And anyway. Then there's duotheism. So Zoroastrianism, I think, is an example of duotheism. For them, there's a good God and an evil God, as I understand. And so the cosmos is a fight between good and evil. Then there's, of course, monotheism. There's the one God, and then there's whoever, maybe angels or saints or whatever beneath that deity. But the point is that there's one God. Okay, and finally, you can actually have religions that are agnostic, maybe even atheist. So Buddhism is a prime example of that. The early Buddhists in India did not worship any of the Hindu gods. So the next main subject that you'll want to think through is the values of that religion. Now, it seems to me that there's about maybe 4 different ways that you could have values that I'm going to go through, that I thought of anyway. There might be more, but basically my thinking is you can have, first of all, a virtue-based value system that's basically like there's a set of virtues like courage, strength, loyalty, mercy, patience, compassion, love, stuff like that. You can have a system of morals. The angel of the Lord came down from on high, or the angel or this God came down to the people or whatever, right? And laid down, these are the laws and these are the commandments that you must obey. Third up, there's an enlightenment oriented religions. So more like philosophical or mystical religions might emphasize a sense of enlightenment, that you're trying to become wiser and more insightful, and that's what's valued. And then finally, there's tribalism, which is basically, our clan, our tribe, our country, or whatever is just, that's what it's about. We're basically trying to unify us as a whole against, the rest of the world, basically, for our own protection or because we're imperialistic bastards or whatever. Okay, now what exactly those values are, like what drives the virtues or morals or the sense of enlightenment or the sense of tribalism or whatever, might vary, certainly. And you probably want to think through those as well. Like, what are the values of the culture that are being enshrined in the virtues or morals or whatever. But I think that one way in which a made-up religion can really pop in a fantasy world is the value system. I feel like if you have a value system, that really, really kind of underscores what it's about. When you're a member of that religion, your character is, then, you live by certain principles that guide probably how you're going to play your character. So that's really impactful in the game. I think it's really actually an important one. Number 3 in our 5 big topics, styles of worship. So a lot of people in this day and age think that all religions are prayer-oriented in terms of their worship style. And that's actually not true. It's understandable because a lot of people, at least in the West, were brought up in religions in which the main way that you worship is by praying. But a lot of religions, the ancient Greco-Romans, for example, made offerings. Okay, you can still see this in Hinduism, I think in Shinto, I believe, offerings of incense. You can have offerings of like a cake, like particularly for an agricultural goddess, maybe like the best bread that was made from the harvest or something like that could be offered up. You can have offerings of, wine or milk, honey, oil. These are all things that could be like poured out into the earth, for example. Sometimes you'd offer them into the fire, so the idea is that they go up to where the gods live. So not all cultures have the concept that down is bad and up is good. Usually, like for the ancient Greeks and Romans, for example, it was like up is where a lot of the gods live, but some of the gods live in the earth, and also the ancestors live in the earth because the land of the dead is in the earth. It's not necessarily bad that it's in the earth. That's just where the ancestors live. And yes, they describe it in bad ways, but it's not, I don't think they really believed that it was this horrible, torturous place. I think a lot of that was really more like poetry to describe death. Okay. And then another form of worship you can have is spiritual practices, such as meditation, ecstatic dancing, that kind of thing. So, they might chant mantras like, they do in some Indian religions, and Asian religions. They might have, rosaries that they count or beads that they count through, things like that. And those are kind of more like, really kind of mystical practices. 4. Let's talk holidays. I think that holidays are another thing that really make a religion pop in a fantasy world, particularly in a role-playing game, because it's something you can do between adventures. It's like you come back from the dungeon and it's the opening of the ship trading festival, and there's like all these people selling the ceremonial type of fish that's baked in a special kind of cake or whatever, right? And there's like these blue streamers, on all the docks to symbolize like a good currents or, whatever it is. Point being that there's like holidays are really neat. Like holidays are these cultural events that really bring people together. And I think that's another way that like one of my goals in making up religions for fantasy worlds is to see if I can't come up with something that somebody other than the party cleric actually wants to be involved with. If there's like this religion that has a value system and has holidays and customs and stuff like that, and that actually makes it really interesting and pops. You could have holidays for the agricultural cycle, for an agricultural deity, like tilling of the fields, planting, harvest, the dry stores of winter. For a herding deity, you might have the herding cycle. There's holidays for the foaling of lambs, for moving the herd to new pastures, for the slaughter, and so forth. For a solar religion, like a sun god, you'd have the solstices and equinoxes. You might also have daily rituals of sunrise and sunset, noon, and so forth. Maybe even midnight. Who knows? I think the ancient Egyptians actually really did do midnight rituals for the sun because the sun's somewhere. It's just, not here. For a moon goddess, you could have the full moon, the dark moon, the first quarter moon, the last quarter moon, all that kind of stuff. You can also have big mythological events in the life of a deity or hero or whoever it is, saint or something, where there's things like their birthday, their marriage, when they travel to, like Apollo, for example, travels to the land of the Hyperboreans during the winter because he's kind of a summer god. And then finally, if you have a scripture religion, you can have recitations or readings of little pieces of it that go on throughout the year, maybe one a month or something like that. So those are a few ideas to get you going. But I think that if you make holidays interesting, you don't have to do that much, just a few little customs. It can really make things pop, particularly if there's like a festival and that actually comes up in the adventure or something like that. I think it can really, add some interesting flavor. And finally, number 5. So this is kind of my miscellaneous category, but it's things like raiment, customs, various things. So first of all, how does the clergy dress? And honestly, I never really liked holy symbols. I think that's a good starting point. You've got to have a holy symbol. But, there's so much more you could do with it. Like, the priests of, the agricultural goddess wear green and white to some, for whatever reason. And so then whenever you see these priests who are all in green and white, you go, oh, that's priests of the agricultural goddess. It also might make it a little bit more of a challenge to play a cleric because they might be required, maybe they're required to wear crimson, right? And that's not going to be very good for stealth if the party's trying to be stealthy, but oh well, their deity requires them to wear crimson. That's their raiment. It really adds a lot of flavor to that. And then you could, also have other types of things, head dresses or special, crowns or something you wear on your head that has a particular symbol. You can have things like particular types of jewelry, bracelets or necklaces that they wear. They might have a certain, staff of office that they wear. Maybe they even use that as a mace, to bash people. But that can really pop as a thing, in your fantasy world. Next, there's customs around things like weddings, funerals, baby blessings. How do those things go? Again, these are the things that are going to tie in and inspire the non-clerics to actually have religion so that, there's all these customs that have to happen. It also gives clerics more to do that in the holidays, more to do than just cast cleric spells, so that you can go well, you can't go to the dungeon right now because, it's thus and such holiday, or, you would go adventuring, but you have a baby blessing that you have to do, and that involves, gathering, bay laurel leaves so that you can, tap the baby's forehead with, bay laurel leaves soaked in olive oil or something. And then, kind of a final thought is, how does the religion determine divine authority? So do they have some sort of scripture that says these are the commandments that were laid down by this deity? Do they have some sort of revelation to a prophet where, the deity spoke to this prophet of old, and maybe it's not written down, maybe it's oral? Do they have some sort of shamans or soothsayers or oracles who actually kind of go into a trance and kind of speak to the deity and tell everybody what the deity's will is? Do they have some sort of divination? Do they throw the bones, or do they use, runes, or in ancient Greece, I seem to remember there were some temples of Apollo, where they'd have these mice and they let the mice out, and depending on where the mice ran, it would mean something. Okay, some concluding thoughts. First of all, I don't think you should go too hog wild over this, or if you do, which is great, because I love geeking out in world building, don't tell your players absolutely everything about the religion, because they're going to just hit tilt. Just give them like 3 little facts, well, so and so is the god of the sun. He's worshipped at the solstices and equinoxes. His priests all wear robes that are gold and black striped to represent when the sun is shining and when it is not. And they do baby blessings by touching like a sunflower to the forehead of the newborn baby in order to bring the sun's power and blessing into the child. That's all you need. And boom, suddenly it's like, wow. Right? So I think if you take this advice that I gave you, come up with religions that are really going to pop and really going to feel organic and part of the world and be something that your players are going to get into rather than just like a list of gods. So have fun deity making and religion making. Tell me what you do. Tell me what you've done. Tell me what you think about this. I look forward to talking to you in the comments. And as always, until next time, happy dreaming, everybody.